here. We'll be getting started shortly with our session. So we are just waiting just another few seconds to get started so that everything catches up through the Facebook.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, welcome everybody. If you can hear it, if you'll just kind of comment in the chat box. Again, I'm Susan, and this is one of our Doggers Facebook live sessions to kind of help us through this COVID-19 pandemic. And we're very pleased to have with us today Todd Newton. He is runs Lone Star PEO here in Texas, which is a human resources and payroll support business. And I know there's a lot of questions from our audience about managing the payroll side of this. So Todd, thank you for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me sit in on this. And I'm happy to provide any information and any resources that I might be able to help your members.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of an echo. I'm not sure why.
Is that coming maybe from my microphone?
No, we'll see. I think now we've lost Todd. So bear with us, guys. I think we're wearing our app out. We've done so many of these.
Is that any better now?
You sound good.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that we're good here. All right. So I think the echo is on my side, so I'm not sure why that is.
I love IT problems.
Aren't they wonderful? Yeah. Well, we're going to persevere. I will ask questions, and hopefully you'll do most of the talking. So what do you recommend? How do employers really communicate to their employees about COVID-19? Do you have anything to definitely say or not say?
Well, I mean, I think probably the best resource on educating your employees is going to be that CDC website dedicated to COVID-19. It's got a great little employer section on there that talks about communication with employees. I think too, it's important that an organization select, maybe the general manager or the owner, one point of contact for their employees to provide information out to their workforce rather than having multiple managers or assistant managers trying to kind of stumble through it. I've seen a lot of clients, especially in the retail space, looking at sending a brief text message or some other type of messaging solution every day or every evening to their employees, just kind of giving them a heads up as to what they understand is going on as of this minute that may impact them tomorrow. As you know, some of these things are changing so quickly, it's literally hour by hour that new things are coming down from both the federal, state, and municipal levels.
Okay, yeah, and we have shared that resource, and I think I wouldn't be surprised if Robin throws that into the chat in case people haven't seen that. Is Todd still with us, or am I still with you guys? And again, we apologize for the technical issues. Okay, Robin says we're both on, so I'm going to carry on. I'm not hearing Todd, so hopefully he can hear me. So Todd, what should they do if they have a staff member they suspect is sick that has come to work?
say he should be back in a minute? He should be back in this. I'm hoping that he's back in a second.
There we are.
All right.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure. My phone just disconnected for a second there.
Yeah, that's what it just dropped off, but you're back there now.
You had just started to ask another question. What was that?
Okay. If they suspect an employee may be sick, what's your recommendation if they've come to work and they think they could be sick?
Well, I think the CDC has been very clear on this, that if you as an employer have even the slightest hint that an employee may be sick, you should send them home as quickly as possible to prevent any of your other employees having any contact. They've even gone so far as to allow employers now to use a thermometer to test their employees as they're coming in to work. Normally, that would be a prohibitive medical exam that an employer would not want to do. But in the case of this pandemic, the CDC is recommending that employers put something like that in place. You've got employees that are working in close proximity to both themselves as well as your customers.
Okay, that's definitely an interesting development. Now, if they do send them home, do they have to pay them?
That depends. If they are a hourly employee, the Fair Labor Standards Act is very clear in that you only have to pay an employee for the hours that they work. A salaried employee is a little bit different. Based on the fact that they've come into work for a part of the day and you send them home, yes, you would still be expected to pay that salaried employee, at least for that particular day.
Okay, that's good to have the clarification on that. Well, what about? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I also had a blurb from our association today, the National Association of PEOs, about the House Bill 6201 that's passed the House, I believe it was Saturday or Sunday, that is setting up a number of things to aid small businesses and employers. Number one would be a temporary paid time off or sick leave for individuals that are affected either because they're sick or because they've been placed into a quarantine status. They're trying to get this through the House of Representatives, through the Senate, so that it looks like they're trying to use Social Security and Medicare taxes to offset the cost of these sick days that the feds would put in place for small businesses.
Now, is there any limit on number of employees, or would this affect everybody that has an employee, whether full-time, part-time, any limits?
The draft that I saw limited it to employers with less than 500 employees. So that would be probably every one of your members.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so that's definitely something to watch. And I know you've been sharing resources with us, Todd, and hope that we can ask you to continue to do that and send updates as that bill does progress.
Sure. I was hoping that we would have some other information out of Washington either later this evening or sometime tomorrow morning. If we do, then I will make sure and pass that along. I recall it also expanded some FMLA coverage for individuals that were taking care of sick families, and also some of the small business loans that the president had mentioned a couple days back.
Yeah. Okay. So
Susan, I'm going to jump in to just go over some questions. So one person had asked, would this cover staff or businesses that have already been forced to close? So those who are in that non-essential business, you can't be open right now category.
Yes, my understanding, it would certainly cover those type of things. Also, the Small Business Administration has got a COVID-19 disaster loan program that was instituted on the 12th. So if you search SBA loans with COVID-19, you should be able to get the Small Business Administration, and they've got a speedy process for small employers to be able to apply for federal funds to get them through this, whether they've been shut down or just impacted adversely by the shutdowns.
Okay, that's good to
know. And also some of the small business loans that the president had made.
Okay, that was interesting.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. So what about protective equipment, providing gloves or masks? Do you have any insight or recommendations with what we provide to keep employees and clients safe?
Sure, I would again point your members back to the CDC. They're stating that readily available masks aren't necessarily very effective for a typical work environment that your employees would be in. They're requesting that those supplies be reserved for medical personnel. What they say the most effective is going to be that social distancing, keeping 6 to 8 feet away from your coworkers and your customers. Good news, I heard that COVID-19 is not able to infect any canine or dogs that you may be taking care of, so you don't have to worry about a transmission there. You may want to consider implementing some type of process where your staff members are dropping off the guests or picking up the guest in the parking lot so that your customers can actually stay in their cars and not have any direct contact with your staff at your facility.
Okay, that's definitely helpful. What about workers' compensation insurance? Will that help pay for anything related to this?
It could. I spoke with our workers' comp experts yesterday, and in fact, if it can be shown that one of your employees came in contact with an infected person, or they could prove with the virus and actually became infected. On another note, on insurance, your general liability policy may have a rider on that called bodily injury. So if you have a client that comes in and says that they contracted the illness because of contact with you or one of your staff members, depending on the state and the type of coverage you have, you may be able to get some coverage for a lawsuit against bodily injury in those type situations.
Oh, okay. That's also good to know. I know that a lot of our employees and staff members, have some fear around this, fear of coming to work. Do you have any tips on how to handle employees that, don't want to come to work or don't want to have certain interactions? How do they handle those situations?
Well, OSHA has been pretty clear up to this point that based on the current scenario with this COVID-19, it is not a scenario where an employee could enact their rights and say, I'm going to refuse to come to work because I have an unsafe work environment or something like that. So I think what it really boils down to is, A, do you need all your staff members there? I'm going to assume that there's probably been a drop off with your customers and bringing their pets in. So you may be in a skeleton crew already or not working full time. Obviously, if somebody refuses to come to work, you could do any type of disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment if you felt that necessary.
Okay.
So I'm going to jump in with a couple other questions. We had somebody ask, so with full-time hourly paid wages or workers, are they legally allowed to decrease their hours due to this? And we're assuming the answer is yes, but she wanted to double check on that question.
Yes, that is correct. You can adjust an hourly employee's work schedule and pay every week, even during the day. If things get slow, you're always able to send an hourly employee home and not pay them after the wages or after the hours that they clock out for.
Okay, and then another question: if we're forced to close and currently give PTO and sick leave, are we required to pay this for an employees if we're forced to close? So they normally would give that if they have a forced closure, do they still have to give that?
Exactly, and that's a good question as well. As an employer, you're not required to pay out PTO or vacation. You always have the option to turn down a request for sick or vacation time.
And then one other question kind of related to the other hourly employee question a second ago about reducing their hours. Somebody has an employee that's asking for a letter saying her hours have been reduced. Is that something you would recommend giving, or is there a reason she would need that? Or
I'm not sure why anyone would need a letter or anything like that. What I would do would just be provide a copy of the work schedule, the work assignments, rather than putting anything in writing. Just say, hey, these are the work schedules that are posted. Feel free to take a picture of it or, make a copy of it and bring it home so you know when you're going to be here.
Okay, great. So if you have questions, just continue to put them in the chat and we'll keep trying to answer as many of those as possible.
Super. So kind of on that same track, Todd, that, if they're doing this reduction of hours and it goes like 30 days or, kind of an extended period, do they have any risk of, like, if they have full-time versus part-time status, or is it still at any time you can make a change?
Well, I think that's a good question as well. Obviously, the full-time and part-time status, a lot of that implication relies around benefit packages.
Right.
And what type of benefit package do you have? Most insurance carriers, when you're out there looking at a major medical plan or insurance package, are going to want full-time employees to be eligible for the policy. In a scenario such as this, where we have this, this crisis going across the country, insurance carriers aren't necessarily going to be wanting to make sure that your employees are working a full 30-hour week to be considered full-time. Now, you may have some employees that used to work 40 hours that are now only working 15 or 20 hours a week, just because you're not busy enough to keep everybody there full-time. You could take the stance in that scenario and say that an employee is no longer eligible if they want to get out of it because they simply can't afford the coverage any longer.
Okay.
By switching them from full-time to part-time would typically alleviate that eligibility. And so they may be eligible for state continuation or COBRA coverage or something like that, but they could be taken off the policy if it's something that they desire to do. The same thing goes with your facility. Most insurance policies require the employer to pay 50% of the lowest cost employee-only coverage. If there becomes a scenario where customers just aren't coming in, you're bleeding cash, you have the right to terminate that policy on any month. You just need to let the carrier know that you're not going to be able to continue that coverage. And then, 3 or 4 months goes by, the economy's coming back, your customers are back in place. You would just need to be re-underwritten to get that policy put back in place.
Okay, so that's a potential cost savings. There's Robin. We like it when you pop in.
Because it means I'm going to ask questions.
I like
There were a lot of questions. So if an employee chooses to stay home because they are, nervous about getting COVID-19, and so that's a voluntary decision that they made to stay home, can they still file for unemployment or supplemental pay? Or how does that work?
I wouldn't think so. But obviously, that hasn't been tested because this scenario has never come up in front of an unemployment hearing officer before. The good and the bad with unemployment claims, typically on a small employer, if you just have somebody that's going to file a claim for a couple of days of missed work just because they weren't coming in or their hours were reduced, it will have not much of an impact on your unemployment account and your tax rate. With that said, if you have all of the employees for your entire facility go on to unemployment for a couple of months, that could have a pretty adverse impact on your unemployment tax rate the following calendar year.
Okay. So someone just said, can you go over the salaried employees again? Do you have to pay them if they're not working?
Sure. And I had provided a link to you guys that had a Department of Labor Pandemic Frequently Asked Questions link on there. I think that would be really helpful to send out to your members. That question is addressed specifically on that link.
Yeah,
So,
we will have all of those links will be on thedoggurus.com/COVID-19 when we upload this video to there, or the link to there. We'll put all those links in there as well, so everyone will have access to that.
okay, great, because it talks about the full-time, part-time, the hourly, as well as salaried lack of work. So I'm going to give you 2 scenarios. Typically, your facility is open for business, and you may have somebody that's a salaried employee that calls in sick or is unable to come to work for some day, for a solid day. In that case, the Fair Labor Standards Act states very clearly that you wouldn't have to pay that employee for that particular day. If they work part of a day, generally you should pay them. This scenario with this COVID-19 outbreak is a little bit different. If you, the employer, are telling your employees not to come into work and they are willing and able, the Fair Labor Standards Act says they need to be off work for 5 days for a week. before you can stop paying them. Again, that Department of Labor link goes into more detail and gives you some examples and scenarios of that situation. But the distinguishing factor is with whether or not the employee is ready, willing, and able to work, and you, the employer, are telling them not to work.
Okay, that's a good distinction. So another person said, if we need to reduce hours and the employee chooses to leave permanently because their hours are reduced, is that a voluntary leave of employment? And will they be eligible for unemployment? So basically, if they quit because their hours are reduced, how does that work for unemployment?
Yes, so that would be a voluntary resignation. Now, they could apply for unemployment just for the missed wages, for the missed hours. We have many customers in the construction, the oil field business that do that regularly. Here in Texas, we may get, a hurricane or something like that, and construction industry may be shut down for 2 weeks, and all those construction workers run out and file unemployment for those 2 weeks. And then when they go back to work, they start resuming their regular wages. So that would be one scenario. If an employee decides to terminate their employment because you didn't have enough hours to make their ends meet to pay their bills, then yes, they could do so. Now, that doesn't prohibit them from filing an unemployment claim. And I'm honestly not certain what the result may be. Here in Texas, unemployment hearing officers are notorious for making different decisions than one another. So it may just depend on which unemployment hearing officer you wind up with if it actually goes to hearing as to whether or not you would win that case.
So you might not ever talk again, Susan, because there's so many questions.
Another note, I saw that in that House bill, they're looking at $1 billion worth of funding to help supplement the various state unemployment agencies to offset some of the cost and the burden on each of the individual states. So I think the feds will be giving us some assistance with regards to unemployment and some of those claims and things that we're inevitably going to see over the next, 20 to 30 days as this thing really kind of ramps up.
Okay. And then someone asked a question about unemployment tax rates going up. If if this happens, is there going to be relief for employers that have been forced to close?
Well, there's a couple of things. One, if you have claims on your unemployment account, here in Texas, and I believe many other states, there's generally a 3-year look back period. So your rate is based on the amount of claims paid out versus the dollars collected in unemployment tax to come up with the percentage that you pay on the first dollar's worth of those taxes. If the feds step in and relieve some of those costs for the states could choose not to pass along the typical increase that you would normally see just by having some additional claims. We can't tell you exactly what that's going to be, and it could vary from state to state how those things are handled. If you do have a scenario where a facility actually goes out of business and is closed, I wouldn't worry about an unemployment account because you're not going to be paying unemployment taxes any longer through it.
Right. Okay. And then somebody said wait, hang on, I just lost it. There's a lot of discussion about what everyone's doing, but if somebody resigns, they can or they cannot collect unemployment.
Someone can always file an unemployment claim. Just because they resign doesn't mean they can't file it, and it doesn't mean that they won't win. They could win an unemployment claim, for example, if they have a hostile work environment. They could just prove that it was so miserable or the work environment was so bad that they just couldn't continue to go to work every day. They may win a claim just by claiming that you weren't providing enough hours for them to get by, and so therefore they needed to go find another job. In those scenarios, typically with this economy doing so well, they would only be unemployed for a short amount of time. With this pandemic upon us all, I'm not real sure what unemployment rates and unemployment averages are going to do over the next few weeks or few months as this thing kind of rolls along.
And then we've had this question come up quite a bit is there, like, people are trying to make the best decision for their employees, And if they are faced with, should I lay off my employees so that they can get unemployment, or should I just gradually reduce their hours, as we slow down? Is there a benefit one way or the other in terms of the employee or the employer?
I wouldn't think so. So, as I said a few minutes ago, if you're going to start reducing hours, your employees can go out and apply for unemployment for the difference between their full rate of pay and the reduced hours. And so that's one tool they've got at their disposal. And if you're not concerned about your unemployment rate and the negative impact that might have on your organization at a later date, educate them on those things and let them know, hey, I'm knocking you from 40 hours to 20. You can apply for unemployment for the other 20 hours that you're missing from now on. They should be able to get that through the unemployment office and start receiving those income benefits relatively quickly. And then as business picks back up, they will simply be granted more hours and not need that assistance. The flip side of that is if you just lay them off, they're going to file for unemployment for their entire wage base. Therefore, it's going to have a larger hit on your unemployment account.
All right. I think that's all we have for now, Susan. So I'll throw it back to you. And if you guys still have questions, we'll try to answer as many as possible. You just keep leaving them in the comment section.
All right. Thank you. So I know layoffs are never fun. In my corporate life, I went through a few rounds of having to lay a team off. And so I'm wondering, this may be new for a lot of these small business owners actually, doing a permanent layoff. What guidelines or tips should they go through? Because I know, and it may vary based on size. I know we had to kind of go through that whole non-discriminatory reason and have a spreadsheet that we could have as support. So just kind of curious what you recommend if they feel the decision needs to be made to actually do a layoff.
Well, I think that, the good and the bad with this COVID-19 scenario that we're in now is it's plain and simple. It's cut and dry, whatever you want to say. Everyone knows what's happening and why it's happening. It's happening because of this pandemic, and it's happening because the loss of revenue and the lack of need for the workforce. So I think in that regard, it becomes very simple. I think it's more difficult on most small business owners to lay an employee off for poor work performance or something like that they've been around for a long time versus a scenario like this.
Okay. All right. So, and do you have to, they can just, if it's not any tips on making a selection, or it's just.
Well, you always want to be careful that, you're still looking at your protected classes, age, sex, race, those type things. And you're not saying, well, I'm going to lay off, the 5 oldest employees that I have. It's one of those things that you as a business owner are really going to have to think hard. If you're only going to lay off a small portion, what do those need to be? And, I think you probably need to hang on to, your most skilled, your key manager type employees and things, even though they may not just be managing any longer. They may be the ones actually providing care.
Okay. So job responsibilities can definitely alter in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, you may actually throw out most of your job descriptions during this time. I mean, you may have one person that does it all, or people that are shifting around and moving positions on a regular basis just to try and fill the needs of the facility.
Okay. Well, it's great to be able to have that flexibility, and I know all of us are hoping that these short-term sacrifices means in maybe 3 months, businesses pick back up. We need more employees. Do we have to go back to those laid off workers first, or what do you recommend?
No, I mean, unless you're under some type of collective bargaining or union agreement or an employment contract that has some language to that effect, you're free to pick and choose any new hire that you might want to as the economy comes back and you're starting to grow your business again. Now, it may be advantageous to you as a business owner to hire someone that's experienced in your industry and knows your facility and your customers. And so it may be the best choice to try and find some of those old employees again, but there's no mandate that you hire them back.
Okay, that's great. So, Robin, if we have more questions come on, Todd, anything else just based on what you're hearing from your clients that we haven't talked about that you feel would be helpful? Or we're all ears. Everything helps.
Well, I think it's been an interesting, kind of day in the news. I thought I saw a blurb earlier that LA is now declared kind of a locked door policy. New York was expecting to do something here today as well. So I think we may see more major metropolitan areas on lockdown, so that civilians are supposed to be in their house, except for the grocery store, the gas station, or a couple of other small things like that. They're not so-called locked indoors. That's obviously going to be a big hit to not only the dog industry, but all of our industries out there. We here at Lone Star are really still keeping a pulse on it. We won't really have a good idea or a feel what our clients' revenue is doing until the next couple of payroll cycles, simply because payroll's in arrears. But I fully expect that our payroll figures for all of our clients will be down considerably compared to where they were last week or the week before.
Okay.
So there are just a couple other questions. One person asked, Ohio said they will mutualize unemployment benefits for employers. Does that mean they would not penalize employers for laid off staff claims if laid off staff claims unemployment during the crisis?
I'm not real sure what they mean by mutualize, other than that they would spread it amongst the general fund and not hit your what they call a chargeback, which is that figure they use to calculate against you. What you might do is you might take a look at the Ohio agency that's responsible for the unemployment. Here in Texas, it's the TWC. And they'll probably have a quick blurb on that on their website that you could Google real quick and get the information that you need.
And then another question, what are the possible ramifications of higher unemployment counts?
Well, nationally, every small business pays federal unemployment as well as state unemployment into their given states. The Federal Reserve or the feds offset a lot of the state costs, and then the state agencies handle the unemployment payments on behalf of the federal system. And so what you'll see is that the feds will increase their rates to the state to offset the increased cost, and then the states will generally increase their rates to their customers, you guys, in the forms of higher percentages based on your payroll caps. Here in Texas, for example, we pay unemployment on the first $9,000 worth of wages. That does vary state by state. I've seen it as high as $30,000 in some states. So it just really depends on your state and the health of that unemployment pool. Unfortunately, the health of all the states' unemployment pools are really going to be taxed over the next or the rest of this year, for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely. So we had several kind of discussions on those states that are closing except for essential businesses. How is it state by state as to what they define as an essential business? Because from the discussion, it looks like some places are saying their boarding facility is considered essential, and then others aren't sure. And this came up earlier with another call Susan and I were on about, is it essential if you're going to the person's home to take care of them? Like, how does that get determined, or is that just up to the state?
I think it's going to be up to the state, and in some cases, even the city. The city of San Antonio yesterday issued a voluntary order that all restaurants, bars, and coffee shops stop serving inside meals. They would all be delivery or takeout only. It seemed like we made a couple of phone calls yesterday and today, and about 70% have voluntarily stopped allowing diners to come in and dine in their establishments. Other places, such as New York and other municipalities, have flat out made it non-voluntary. They have said restaurants and coffee shops and things should be closed. I think that's going to come from your state governors or perhaps even your mayor and maybe even some counties if you're in an unincorporated area.
And then we had another person say, and this might, I don't know if this is semantics, but is there a difference between just taking an employee to 0 hours versus actually laying them off or terminating them? And is that language make a difference in terms of what's happening with the employee?
I would always recommend if the employee is not going to be working and you can't afford the employee to be on your payroll, that you go ahead and terminate that employee. That clears up any benefit issues, any workers' comp things that may come down, any other liability that you have associated with that employee will end once you terminate their employment. That there's something could come up, farther down the road, a couple of days after employment. Oh, well, I hurt my back there that last day, and you just want to make sure that all those things are kind of off your shoulders, rather than just keeping them on the payroll and therefore an employee, even if they don't have hours.
That's actually a really good point. And then going back to, I can't remember the number of the new thing that's going through the Senate and House, the HR 6201, I think. Someone had
Yes.
asked the question, does that require people, they thought that required people to bring back the laid off people first. And you were saying it might not be the case, but does that change if that gets passed?
I don't believe so. I just saw some information on a summary, so I didn't actually read all the language that's on there, but I didn't see anything in the summary that talked about if you laid somebody off, it would be mandatory to come back in order to hire them back in order to receive any type of benefits.
Okay.
I would, as we know for sure, obviously this still needed to go back through the Senate, so inevitably things are going to change on it. As soon as I hear something or I see a new summary, I will certainly shoot you both an email so that you can take a look at it and pass it along to your members as well.
Okay, that's
and keep in mind there may be some state or city ordinances or relief packages or those type things that are coming around as well. Here in Texas, earlier this year, Austin, Dallas, and San Antonio all passed mandatory sick leave policies. None of them have gone into effect because they're all being sued by small businesses. But you may already live in a city that has something like that, in which case those benefits could be used for employees that aren't able to come to work and not have any other adverse effect other than costing you some dollars out of your pocket.
All right. Do you feel like you're in the Spanish Inquisition? Because I'm just keep asking you questions, but there's a lot of questions. So we really appreciate your time with this. So someone had asked, is there any liability to the company if an employee thinks they got infected at work with COVID-19, obviously?
Well, again, you may have coverage on your general liability for customers. If they believe they've been infected at work, I would file a workers' comp claim. That's why you purchase workers' comp. I believe every state in the union outside of Texas, it's mandatory. So that coverage is there for you to use. And I don't believe that the medical expense on that claim would be extremely high unless we had, an older individual or somebody with, an immune system that wasn't up to par and they became very ill. A quick test and stay home from school or from the office for a week is not that big of a hit for an unemployment claim.
And then I think we're winding down the questions, so that's good. Someone had asked, are there any suggestions you have for taking care of employees if you have to lay them off, but you still want to encourage them somehow as we go through this crisis, like keep paying for AFLAC or IRAs or anything like that?
Sure. If you're going to do a temporary layoff, you could keep their benefit package in place and funded with corporate dollars. But there's no requirement to do that. You could even try and keep your employees, on board. The FLSA says that as long as you're paying your employees minimum wage and overtime, that you're good. And so if you have some higher wage earners that you want to keep on board, you may ask them to voluntarily take a lower rate of pay so that you can afford to keep them working during this time, with the understanding that once business picks back up, they could go back up to their regular rate of pay. You could also look at switching your salaried employees to an hourly type environment and paying them less on a temporary basis. Now, I'll caveat that with I wouldn't recommend switching between hourly and salary often or make it a regular practice. But in lieu of this pandemic, this crisis that we have, in order to keep people working and food on the table, if you can afford to do so at a lower rate, it would be reasonable to do some of those type things.
All right.
That's a good recommendation.
I'm going to throw this back to Susan, but we also want to make sure we get Todd's information out there because I'm sure there's going to be other questions after we hang up this call. But Susan, I'll let you close everything out.
Yeah, Todd, this has been really helpful because I know, it's hard enough as a business owner to see, your business go down, and then, the responsibility of your team. Really, you've helped clarify a lot of things. I really appreciate that information you shared, that you could actually even cut pay to where maybe you could afford to keep more people. And I think some of our teams would be willing to do that. So I know you're going to share with us information that we'll be putting out. If someone, you do work beyond Texas, right, to support employers. So tell people how they can reach you. Hopefully this recovers and they may find that they would love to have a PEO resource to work with. So how can they reach you?
Sure. If you'd like to reach out to me, my email address is tnewton@lonestarpeo.com. And, just like you guys, I'm a small business owner as well. So this crisis is affecting my business and my livelihood and everything, all the work that I've done here as well. So I'm right there with you guys, a different industry, but still a small business owner. And it's time for us to tighten up our belts. We're all going to have some serious times ahead of us, but hopefully we can all make it through and come out of this in a few months and be stronger for it.
All right, Todd, well, we thank you very much, and we'll see how this plays out. And if we get lots of questions that we don't have good resources we may invite you back. So we really appreciate everything you shared with us today and your time. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, and no problem. Happy to do it. Have a good one.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.